God had started this journey in me where I knew that there was a lot of stigma attached to things like bipolar or PTSD. While I did feel some shame, I almost felt like a relentless spirit to say, I will not be part of the church that hides this. I'm going to say this. This is my truth. This is my story. And, it's through vulnerability that I think people grow and connect and are able to be in true community and authenticity.
On today's episode, we have Scott and Candiss Fortenberry. They serve a church plant in Jackson, Mississippi, and they are talking about the issue of mental health, which we have not touched yet on the Glass House, and it is a fascinating episode.
I was mesmerized by this conversation, largely because I come from a mental health story. Both of my parents walked through severe mental illness in my 20s, and it has been a journey and a lot of brokenness and a lot of struggle and loneliness through all that. And so as they were talking today, I found myself wanting to call them back and ask more questions about, so what does it mean to deal with mental health? And what does it mean to deal with mental health challenges in the ministry? Because we have a lot of folks who serve on churches who listen to this podcast who have this in their family and they're ashamed to talk about it because it might disqualify them from ministry.
Well, I think a hard part of our marriage is that because that's in your past, and I think there's some shame in there, when I have ever even challenged you to say, hey, this is very genetic. They're both clinically institutionalized. Do you feel okay? I mean, you've been very upset with me about that before.
Because I feel like such a lousy Christian for having lows.
Yeah, but they say that mental health isn't a character issue or a faith issue.
I love when she said that. I felt a little bit set free in that.
I love when Candiss said, I will not be a part of the church that hides this, in reference to bipolar. And I thought that was so interesting. So, my own personal story, I don't know anyone with bipolar. And so I was just intrigued by everything she said. And I loved your reference, Ben, to the truth be told. If we all were able to tell some of our story as freely as she told, I think the church would be so much healthier of a place for people, like a safe place. They use that word safe. And I feel like sometimes the church isn't safe.
I can understand why people are hesitant to even use terms like mental health. Sometimes we only believe what we see on TV, or we think about things in caricatures. When we moved out to Colorado, planted a church, and began talking to non-believing people on our street about Christianity, it was surprising to me how many of them thought it was about handling snakes and things they'd seen on TV. So it made me want to hide the fact that I was a Christian because they weren't going to understand it. Mm-hmm. And in the same way, when you tell someone that you have bipolar disorder, I can only imagine the eyebrows that are raised because they just don't understand it. They've not had any education in it, so they only think of things in the extremes. So of course people are hiding it.
Well, and she also mentioned that going to group therapy was one of the healthiest things she did. And she said, I sat in a circle with people who didn't pretend, which is a really strong statement. And I think also very truthful. And so, she's part of a church, she's a pastor's wife, and she felt freedom going to an off-site group of believers and non-believers together who aren't pretending. And I just thought that was a great challenge to our churches of just stop pretending. That is where the growth happens, is when we get truthful with each other.
Scott's comments about wearing a shield took me back to, I think, episode 1, when I described the moment I had with a counselor, into which I answered his questions with every biblical answer possible. And he said, I feel really lonely with you right now. What he was speaking to is that I was doing a really good job of avoiding the hard parts of the conversation, which pastors can be masterful in doing. And he challenged me today of just, am I a safe person for you? Am I a safe person for other people who are broken? Or do they think I'm going to try to shove some kind of solution on them and shortcut their own healing? I think this conversation is going to set a lot of people free, and I'm excited to get into it. So welcome to the show, guys.
Hi.
Thanks. We're glad to be here.
Yeah.
Well, Lindley and I are interested. We have mutual friends. They've been telling us all about you guys, and we wanted to just start by saying, tell us a little of your story and some of the ups and downs you've been through over these last years.
Currently, we are planting a church, or have planted a church, that will celebrate its 5th birthday in January. So we're in inner city Jackson, and a lot of things that we've learned and that have happened to us in our mental health journey is a part of why and what we're doing here at Soul City. So Candiss will tell us a little bit more about how we got here and kind of what led us to this journey starting in 2014.
Yeah, so 2014, that's like the epic year in our family. Looking back at it now, I thought that at the time it would be the destruction of everything. I didn't realize that God was building a new foundation. So to go back to that time, basically the stress of the present mixed with the traumas of the past and created a bit of a hurricane. And so I had some 30-something seizures in a few days time span. And so in the hospital, of course, I don't remember any of this. Scott could have testified to most of this, but the doctor said, this is not epilepsy. This is trauma-based psychosomatic seizures. And so that led to inpatient at a psych hospital and ECT treatments and all sorts of therapies that would go on there. And then from one hospital to the next hospital to the next hospital, basically we were on a journey where they started to give medication that wasn't helpful for me. They didn't realize I had bipolar disorder. And they were giving me medicine for things that antidepressants alone that trip things up with people with bipolar disorder. So I ended up having to go into an inpatient in New Orleans, and the doctor there, he was kind of an irritable person, but I remember just sitting there, and he said, well, we're going to try lithium. And I immediately got defensive and said, I'm not bipolar. I don't have bipolar. And he said, well, and I think he lied to me because he said, well, sometimes this works for other things too, which is not true. So anyway, I got on, and within 3 days, I was way more grounded and more myself and thinking more clearly. And so came home from New Orleans, entered an outpatient treatment center that I worked at hard work for about 6 to 7 months. And so from that point, we moved to St. Petersburg, Florida, for an extended vacation, we call it, for about 14 months. Moved back, and I re-entered treatment, basically dealing with the traumas of the past and also the bipolar illness itself.
Wow.
Were you in a church at that point, and do you have children or anything like that? Are you dealing with?
Yes. My goodness.
Yeah, sorry. Yes.
And at that point, we were pastoring a county seat church, so 250, 300 people on Sunday morning. It was the doctors and lawyers, and it was the well-to-do of the community was our congregation at the time. And honestly, all this is happening, and I didn't know what to do. She didn't know what to do, and we honestly didn't know what was happening. The words that the doctors are telling me, they're coming in and saying she's having psychogenic seizures, and I'm going, no, they're real. I'm watching them. They're not just in her mind. She's really having them, and I had no frame of reference to understand what was happening. And honestly, I had some people reaching out to me saying, you need community right now. And I didn't know what to do with that. I didn't know how to be open and vulnerable. I had been trained that you don't share these things with people, that it was my job as the husband and protector and father and pastor to not let people in, but to lead well in spite of anything happening at my house.
Wow.
I mean, so your kids, you had previously not been sick up until this 2014, this episode. And so, I mean, are they like, Mom, what's going on with Mom? And
yeah. So we have 5 children. They were very young at that point. I think the youngest was 2 and the oldest was
9.
Yeah, about that. And so they did not know. It's a traumatic year for them because they didn't understand what was happening with me. And Mom was here one day, and then Mom went away for months. And so,
for months, meaning she was gone for several weeks and would come back, and then that didn't work, and we'd go back. So, I mean, really from April to the end of July, it was in and out of different hospitals trying to figure out what's happening with about 2 weeks gone, 2 weeks should be home, 2 weeks gone. And I mean, it was tumultuous, and I didn't do a good job explaining to the kids, but I didn't know what to explain.
Well, how do you explain to young kids about a mental disorder? I mean, they don't understand that when they can't see something broken or whatever.
That's right. That's right.
Scott, question, because I'm thinking through the mind of a pastor right now. Maybe his wife's going through something similar. He doesn't know who to talk to. As you look back on that time, you said you didn't know how to experience a community. What did you learn? Like, what would you say to someone who's going through it now?
Oh man, I learned a ton. If I could have it to do over again, there were even a handful of men in the church that I should have been saying every step of the way, here's what's happening, here's what I'm feeling, here's what I'm scared of. I mean, honestly, I was afraid, but I didn't even know how to express those fears. I felt really, really trapped, and I felt really, really alone. I'll never forget Ben Derrick coming by the hospital, and he's saying, "I go to your church, but I'm not a normal church member." I remember him saying that. He's like, "Dude, you can tell me what's going on." And I remember looking at him going, "I'm good, man. I got it all. I got this. God's prepared. God's in control." And I used all of those good Christian feel-good terms that weren't delivering, and honestly, for me, weren't true at the moment. I was lying to myself.
Did you feel overpoweringly alone through that? Did you have anybody that was walking with you?
So to some extent, I have some moments, and I'll share about those moments. I was driving up to Memphis. It was about a 3-hour drive. And she was in the hospital. I was going to check on her. I'm going to check on her with every anticipation. I had called a meeting with the doctors that were seeing her, and I had every anticipation of those doctors telling me that this is it. Candiss will never be, quote unquote, normal again. And man, I was crying. I remember getting on I-55 and just bawling my eyes out. And I got a random phone call from Andrew Mann in New York City. He was a church planner up there. He had no idea what was going on. He just called and said, "Hey, do you remember when you were here this summer?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "The guy you gave your shirt to in the neighborhood, I just wanted you to know we're going to baptize him Sunday." And so we kind of talked about that. I hung up the phone, and immediately my dad called, and I was talking to him, and I was able to share with him, but it just still wasn't all the intimacy and the details of what was happening in my life. But it was the, "Dad, I'm going to see Candiss. I don't know what to do. We're struggling," those kinds of details. And he hung up the phone and called my brother. And then my brother called right after that. So it was a third phone call back to back to back. And my brother, golly, my brother said, "Dad just called and said, Scott needs you. He needs your brother." And those 3 phone calls back to back to back was a huge God moment of like, and I don't know how else to say it other than I felt like God say, "I see you." Mm-hmm. I had felt so unseen. I had felt so alone. And those 3 phone calls was that God wink of, "I see you, Scott." Mm-hmm. And that kind of opened the door when we got, I remember getting to Memphis and looking at the doctor, and I think I asked, is this it? Is this the new Candiss? And I remember him laughing at me. And he literally laughed and said, "Son, she's going to be fine. We got to get some things straight, but this is not the new normal." And just in those moments, you just realize, even when I'm an idiot and don't know how to open up, that God supernaturally steps in and open doors to say, "I'm here and I'm with you." I look back at it and go, I should have looked at Ben Derrick and gone, here's what's going on. I'm scared. I don't know what to do with my kids. Are we going to be okay?
Right.
What is, all of those questions. In that, I think I felt the need to be strong for her,
Yeah.
I remember telling her all the way through the journey, Candiss, I'm not embarrassed of you. I'm not ashamed of you. I'll still look at her. Candiss, I'm not embarrassed of our story. I'm not embarrassed of what's happened. In fact, whenever you're comfortable, I'll shout this from the mountaintop. I'll go on the Lifeway podcast and we'll talk about it. Because I knew that was going to be vitally important for her. I didn't understand what was happening inside of me.
Wow.
I honestly was scared of what was happening in me.
Yeah.
You're talking about this happening in 2014. I think even in the last 9 years, mental health has become so much more talked about.
Yeah.
And so, I just see some disorders that have progressed to more understanding. Like we have a child who has celiac. Well, 9 years ago, people didn't even know what that is. And so 9 years ago, when people hear bipolar, I imagine there's some shame attached to that.
Yeah.
And
bipolar is a trigger word for sure.
Yes. And so, tell me your side of the story as you're going through this. We heard from Scott, but what are you processing through this? Like, I've got 5 kids. I'm embarrassed. How did this happen kind of thing?
The week before the seizures happened, I had come to grips with the fact that there was intense traumas in my past. And so there's a house that traumas had happened in South Jackson. And so I thought to myself, well, I'll drive down there and I will face that house and then it'll go away. And so I drove down, got to the house. It had been abandoned. And I was able to walk the perimeter of the home. And I noticed, I just prayed the whole time. I looked in my window where traumas had occurred. And I thought, okay, this is it. And as I walked away, I noticed the foundation had changed, like they were laying a new foundation. And I felt like in my spirit, the Holy Spirit say, same house, new foundation, same girl, new foundation. And so that the seizures happened the next day. I say that because God had started this journey in me where I knew that there was a lot of stigma attached to things like bipolar or PTSD. And while I did feel some shame, I almost felt like a relentless spirit to say, I will not be part of the church that hides this.
Oh.
I'm gonna say this. This is my truth. This is my story. And, it is through vulnerability that I think people grow and connect and are able to be in true community and authenticity.
I love the way you said that.
I just wrote that down, what you just said. I will not be a part of the church that hides this. That's so good.
I'll never forget the Sunday that she said, Scott, you can tell. Go for it. It was in July. And I got to the end of the sermon just before giving the invitation, and I spelled it all out. Here's where we've been. Here's how many hospitals we've been through. Here's what's going on. And I just went boom, 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 boom. And at the end of the service, I'm standing at the back of the door greeting everybody, and they tell me what a great job I did. Don't you love those times, Ben? It's just so feels so plastic. But I'll never forget that day, because that day, about 25 people walked by me and said, "Hey, such and such happened to me. Hey, my mom went through. Hey, I watched my sister. Hey, I'm having these thoughts now."
Absolutely.
And I'm not sure what to do. And it was like walls just, it was the coat and tie community all of a sudden that was broken, real, and very connectable and relatable.
It makes me think of that Matthew West song, Truth Be Told. Have you heard that song?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he talks about how the church is supposed to be a place where people are honest, but they're not. And I do think that honesty is a culture. It's part of a culture, and culture is set by leaders at the top. And so for someone at the top or in the pulpit to say, my wife and I are going through a journey with mental health, it gives everybody else in the room permission to be okay with their own mental health struggles or someone that they love. So I'm really proud of you guys for being ambassadors for this tribe of people that this is part of their story. Nobody signs up for this, by the way. Nobody hopes that this is part of their story.
Can you tell us a little bit of what bipolar, what it looks like, how it's diagnosed, all that kind of stuff? Because for someone who's listening, who's like, I'm on a journey myself and don't know what's going on.
Yeah, so bipolar, I mean, it's an ugly beast. I always say that bipolar lies to you. It lies to you when you're up, and it lies to you when you're down. It makes you believe that you're invincible when you're up, and it makes you believe that you'll never get out of the pit when you're down.
Wow.
And so one of the tales of bipolar, and there's several different levels of bipolar, but one of the things that you can count on is that there's cycles. And so when someone, like looking back now, I can see these cycles that were building in my life over and over. And so, but in the throes of the depression or the throes of the mania, it blinds you a bit. And so I would say to someone who's struggling with any type of cyclical depression or mania, they usually piggyback off each other, that rely on your community, as scary as it is. Have some safe people that can say, hey, I see this. I see you going up. I see you coming down. What do we need to do?
Can you describe what mania looks like? Like, what is mania?
Sure. So for me, my true manic state happened when I was on antidepressants without a mood stabilizer, which is a big trigger for bipolar. It can set it off really quickly. If someone has it and they don't know and they just get on antidepressants, they end up going manic, and then a whole host of problems happened, which is what happened to me. But in my normal mania, I guess you could say that that it comes in waves. Like, I have all this energy and I can do all these projects and I can get all this stuff done and I feel great. Like, I finally feel good. So like if Scott were to say, hey, I see this, I might go, well, yeah, but I'm just feeling good because I'm eating better and I'm exercising. Well, I'm eating better and I'm exercising because and starting to be manic. So I get all this energy to go do all these things. And it kind of feeds on itself. You know, the more that you play into it, the greater the mania grows.
And the higher things go, the lower they fall.
Yeah.
So there is a direct correlation. Our house gets spotless during mania. Because there's all this in it's almost
painted.
It's painted. Yeah. It's almost
so Scott, if she's painting the house, you start getting nervous.
Yeah, it's like whoa, you know, she'll sign up for a marathon.
Yeah,
like, I'm ready. Let's go. I can do a marathon. It's like, you haven't been running. Yeah, but I can do it. You know, and she's convinced of it. Ended up running multiple marathons as a result.
Yeah, but the higher you go, the lower the fall.
Does it happen differently every time? I mean, you never know when it's coming to the low.
For me, about every 4 months, every season change, you can pretty much guarantee I'm going to go up. And then the up usually lasts for me about 4 or 5 days. High energy, get a lot done, and then the crash comes. And it's the falling down that is I think the ugliest part of bipolar. They call it a mixed episode. It's when you're moving from mania to depression. And you have the energy of mania with the hopelessness of depression.
Wow.
And so what happens is that's 99% of the time on bipolar patients that take their life in a mixed episode. And which it's a sad statistic. So, you know, 17% of people with bipolar commit suicide. 17%. And follow through on it. 80% that plan it, 50% attempt it. And so it's a very real serious illness, one that, you know, we take super serious. You know, my son also has bipolar disorder. He's a teenager and he's way ahead of where I was at that point.
Because he's had a mama that's modeled for him. It's okay to get help. It's okay to say, things aren't right and I'm not thinking right.
When you guys see a manic episode, what protective measures do you have in your household to know that you're gonna have that mixed episode coming down?
One of the measures is medication. We keep that on hand. Like there are for me and for Andrew, there are the 911 meds. You take them, you take extra of something, or you take one more of something when you begin to become manic, so that the blow of the fall is not so intense. It's really about medicine management. The other thing is being honest and open, and being able to say, okay, Mom, Dad, or Scott, or whoever, I'm feeling these thoughts. I'm having these thoughts. I feel hopeless, and I feel like I don't want to do this anymore, and I feel like, what's the point? It's, it comes, and I'll say to Andrew, and I'll say to myself, but it goes, you get out of it. And I'm like, yeah, but for it to come around again. So you start that dialogue, and that's when I think we pick up, for myself and for Andrew, a dialogue that says, hey, these are the red flags on the beaches of bipolar that's waving, saying, okay, the down is coming. And
this is so interesting. And
we move in with, I feel like we move in with compassion and understanding, and we get to help. I mean, therapy, psychiatrist, God gave us these tools. And I believe he works through them.
You were talking about the honesty of it. When you guys, since you have been very honest about it in the church world, I imagine people are fearful of telling people because of the backlash. Have you guys experienced any of that, or has it honestly been an inroad to connect with people?
Most part, it's been an inroad to connect with people. But I've noticed that in situations like maybe the traditional church setting, it's harder to connect in that way. It's like plugging into an outlet that has no electricity with it. It's like you're ready to connect, but maybe the person isn't able to be vulnerable with you yet. And so one thing I love about us moving into the inner city is that, a lot of our friends and neighbors here, they don't hide things.
Nothing.
They're open and honest. And when I say, usually it is my story that breaks down the walls.
Right.
When I say, yeah, I have bipolar disorder, and they look at me and say, oh, really? My son does. Yep. And I'm able to say, hey, this is our thing. This is what God gave me. And, God allowed me to have, however you want to word it, but God sees me through it, and so it enables me to connect.
One of the reoccurring themes on the show has been the mold of the pastor's wife, as if there is one. And we're realizing more and more that most women who serve as pastor wives don't feel like they fit the mold.
Right.
I can only imagine how you felt going through your journey of having hopelessness and thinking, I'm now a detriment to my husband's ministry because I'm not stable. And pastors' wives are supposed to be stable. How did you overcome that and that sense of, desperate, I'm not enough for Scott?
Community. God allowed me to go to therapy where I had group therapy, and I sat around in a circle with people who didn't pretend, and I was able to say, here's my story, and these are the parts of me that I feel like I have to hide. And they accepted me, and I thought, this is church. This is what church is supposed to look like. And so I came home and I told Scott, and I'm like, this is the way it's supposed to be. And that sort of gave me a superpower to be able to say, okay, I know there's this mold that I'm supposed to fit, but I think that mold is possibly destructive to people, and I have to be the me that God created me to be. If I don't, I'm walking in disobedience. And so I begin to say to myself, it's like, self, you're going to have to walk in that church and you're going to have to be you. And God made you. And if somebody has a problem with the you that God made, that's them and God. That's not me and Scott.
I often say that I've never been to a conference where a speaker starts by saying, let me tell you the 3 biggest messes I've made of my life. I mean, it's always the formula that they figured out that everybody can take home and use in their ministry. But yeah, I feel drawn to a person who leads with their weaknesses and is open about their struggles. And so when you say you only found a non-pretending group at group therapy, it makes me sad for the church.
Right.
What is wrong with the church that we're not able to stop pretending and talk about things like bipolar that are affecting our families? Like, what do you guys think is going on there, and why did that lead you to plant this church?
So she talked about that. Through this journey, I had a good friend that I'd served on staff with at churches that ended up coming out as an alcoholic. And as he was going through recovery, he started taking me to AA groups with him.
Wow.
And so I'd never had a reason to go to an AA group. I just knew that these are the things that happen. And honestly, as I walked in, I started hearing the things that Candiss had been telling me about her group. It was like, nobody in here agrees with any of the bad behaviors that's being talked about, but nobody in here is casting any sort of judgment. They really are all saying, we're with you. We want to help you walk through this and get out of it. And that helped me go, that's what we want to have in our church. That kind of openness and vulnerability. And so you said it starts at the top. And I started this podcast by telling you, I was not that. I was not open, and I was not vulnerable, and I was not willing to or safe. Yeah, Candiss used to tell me all the time that I wasn't safe, and I was like, what do you mean? I love you with all of my heart.
Lindley has told me that. I don't get it.
Yeah,
I still don't get it.
I would look at her and go, I don't have a frame of reference. I would always tell her, I get off work at 4:30 and I'm home at 4:35. What do you want? How much safer can I be? And she, through the journey, I realized what she was communicating is that I wasn't even being honest and vulnerable with her. I had my pastor shield on all the time. And so I walked around with it all together. I went to a group. So I ended up, it's a group called Deer Camp. And we didn't kill any deer, and we had no guns there that I was aware of. But at this deer camp, I went, and it was 40 or 50 men sitting around a campfire, and they're all sharing their story. And I remember looking at my buddy and looking at him saying, dude, I am not going to connect in this group. I mean, they were telling all kinds of stuff. And I was like I'm a pastor, and I don't have the big bad Paul testimony. I have the kind of Timothy testimony where I came to Christ at 7. And he goes, just be honest and tell your parts of the story. And tell your story. And I remember my dad died when I was 7 months old. My mom remarried when I was 2. They divorced when I was 11. So I started unpacking all of these parts of my life, and I ended up getting emotional. And I remember as soon as I got done, him leaning over going, still don't think you're going to connect? he said, your life is as much of a disaster as anybody else's. And I have learned how to sermonize my story. So I can share my story after I got the big red bow on top of it. And it's all come together, and there's a powerful moment. Yeah. And so Candiss still has to help me with this to go, don't wait until it's wrapped. Mm-hmm. Let me watch you make the sausage. And so I have, and my kids will tell you, my wife will tell you, 2018 was a defining moment. It's 4 years after her deal for me, of me going, I am no longer going to be unsafe. I'm going to be transparent and open and real and vulnerable. And honestly, I've become a better dad. I've become a better pastor. I've become a better husband. I'm a better me, because actually I'm now an authentic me and not not the guy that feels the pressure to have it together.
Candiss, for me, who maybe is a little further behind Scott, what were the specific things he did or said that made you feel safe? That you begin to say, okay, he's becoming a safe person.
One of the things is probably the biggest thing is he stopped trying to fix it. And, there's some things that can't be fixed, not on this earth. And so, when we look at situations of family of origin issues or traumas or bipolar disorder or whatever, anxiety, whatever it may be, Scott's a very logical thinker. And so that's great. I mean, I think we need those people. He's very literal. And so when I would say these illogical fears of mine, supposedly illogical fears of mine, he would come back with rational thinking. And I was like, wait a minute, this is not helpful and now I understand you can't talk logical to illogical people, right? I mean, so when he stopped fixing my problem and said, man, I see you. I'm so sorry that you're going through this. How can I be with you in this moment? And not try to get out of it.
I don't know how any married couple doesn't hear that and feel some level of conviction, because we do try to slap reason on top of emotion a lot. Like, I can think of times where, Lindley, I felt like you're being illogical. And so my job is to make sure you're seeing things straight. And it never works.
She said that's what's made her feel like it. There's still a long way to go there. So don't know. I could definitely a number of times that I look back and go, I did it again. I'm fixing it.
I'm interested in hearing you guys talk about how others might be set free who are maybe they feel called to a traditional church, but they don't feel like it's safe to be themselves. Yeah. Or if people find out that we have this issue in our marriage, and then you live in hiding, which is really a horrible place to live, in hiding. So what do you say to couples now, as you've told your story, who are like, can you give me something that I could take steps toward health?
Well, I would say, and both of us have shared it, we actually started feeling that safety outside of our church. And it was even outside of our church plant, that we were creating a new culture. And it's almost like an evangelism strategy. I love a guaranteed Tuesday night, we're going to go knock on everybody's door. But the truth is, where that really impacts our life is not if we're just doing it on Tuesday night when we're knocking on somebody's door, but if we can start sharing the gospel in every part of our life. So if we can get some practice of being vulnerable and real outside of the church, it makes it a whole lot easier to step back into the church and be vulnerable and real. And as we, particularly as pastors, set that stage, it becomes easier for our people to do the same.
Have you guys done any reading of Brennan Manning?
Yes.
I was going to say, when I listen, you guys are like modern day ragamuffin gospel people. And, he just, because of his own battle with alcoholism, understood sinners in a way that other pastors and priests never tried to or could. And so I just love what you guys are saying. I feel like there's going to be a lot of folks out there that realize they're pretending and they're lonely and they're scared. And, we have a loved one who's been through alcoholism. And I just think, I've never thought about asking him if I could go sit in on his group and see what that's like. I don't even know if that would be a good idea, but I'd be interested.
Oh man, I think it's a great idea. I mean, it was a life-changing idea for me to watch people be vulnerable. It was like,
we're supposed to be good at it. We're Christians.
I've preached that people need to do that, but I wasn't doing it, So we know the principles. But watching it happen is beautiful.
Candiss, Scott had mentioned in an email when we were communicating that you've had sort of an educational journey since this.
So I had cancer when I was 18, and tried to do college for a couple of years. It got rather difficult just with the illness, and we got married, and one thing led to another, and I wasn't able to finish my degree. And now I look back and go, okay, thank you, God, because this is like the time to do it. I have had on my heart for a long time, ever since 2014, really. It's like, this being therapy, the tools, art therapy, trauma work, the gospel in really hard moments have revolutionized my way of living and that new foundation. And I thought, this is too good to keep to myself. And so I prayed for quite a while. I'm like, God, if you open the doors, I would love to finish my degree. And he opened the perfect door, and I'm getting a bachelor's in psychology with creative art therapy concentration. So the prayer for that is to go on and get my master's in trauma work therapy afterwards and use art therapy as a medium.
You'll be
to
amazing
do trauma
at
work.
that.
That's awesome.
Tell.
Well, I just think God has just done this incredible thing. I just look back and I go, okay, that was only Jesus.
So she also mentioned the foundation. Can I ask a question now?
Sure.
Okay. Can you tell, going back to that house just a couple years ago?
Yeah. So I went after treatment, after the most extensive part of my treatment where I did intense trauma work.
And really got to the bottom.
Yeah, really, really dealt with the stuff that I was like, I'm not ready to go to that corner yet. It was amazing. God just set me free in so many ways. But I decided I would go back down to that house that I had gone to the day before my seizures. And so I drove my little self down to South Jackson again. And actually, I was taking a girl home, and a girl that had some similarities to my story. And I was taking her home, and I realized, oh my word, this is my neighborhood. And I thought, okay, God, this is it. I'm going to go look at that house again. So I drove up, and it had been completely restored. A family was living in it. It was beautiful. And I just sat there, and I sat in front of the house, and in my mind's eye, I just called that little girl that lived in that house and said, come on, let's go. And Jesus has us. And that was just a pivotal moment for me to see that God had brought enormous healing.
That is powerful.
I would speak, but I'm tearing up.
I don't know what to say to that. That is so powerful. What are some things you wish that people in the church understood about mental health? How do we make this a conversation where people are equipped to have it?
I want to say it's not a character issue or a faith issue. I wish people understood that.
Yeah.
And that medicine is a tool, and a tool that God uses. If I could say just openly, like a microphone to the whole church world, I would say, hey, listen, those of you that don't struggle with mental illness, I know you know somebody who does. The population is too large. And even if you don't, you can understand on some level feeling despair or hopelessness at some point in your life, I'm sure, if you're any kind of type of a normal human. And so to reach into that part of you and allow it to be a bridge to those that are suffering with mental illness. And also I would like to say that, I used to be very upset about the fact that I had bipolar disorder. And when I'm in the pit, I don't like it then either. Like, I'm like, this is not worth it. Get rid of it. God, just take it away. And I feel certain that God has told me he's not going to take it away, not in my situation. And so I believe it's actually become the biggest vessel that God has used to connect me and connect the gospel to people who are hurting. Whether that's in a group therapy situation where people do not have the hope of Jesus Christ, or in our community where there's a profound brokenness. And so to the church world, I want to say, hey, listen, these are gifts and not curses. And if we allow God to do his work through them, I believe that we would be a much more approachable people to this world.
It reminds me so much of the passage where Paul talks about the thorn in his flesh.
Right.
Yes.
And how he begged God to take it away, but in order to keep him from becoming conceited, God gave him the gift of this pain.
Right.
It kept his ministry grounded. When I hear you talk, Candiss, I hear Jennifer Rothschild in your voice, because blindness for her has been bipolar for you. It's been something that she never wanted, but God has used. And I would encourage you guys to get some time to listen to the episode we did with her, because she talks about when she walked through this really dark depression, that a doctor had to help her understand that the brain is an organ. And just like every other part of your body sometimes needs medicine, it's okay to accept the fact that you have a sick organ that needs some help.
Right.
And so for all those out there who maybe are struggling with mental illness, afraid to say it because they're in ministry, is there a place you would point them to get some help, or a place that you might say, here's a place you might look to get started in the journey?
First, I would say find somebody safe that's close. Find a friend, find somebody right there. On the professional help, I will be very honest with you. That is a challenge. But once you find the space, man, it's been life-changing. 3 Oaks for us here in Jackson was a godsend. I watched her come back to life as she was in that group therapy setting. There's a place in New Orleans. I'm drawing a blank on the place in Nashville.
On site.
Oh, yeah.
We've heard great things about it.
Yeah, I went to a trauma intensive there, and it was powerful.
I've heard that recently. Someone recommended that. It sounds to me like find someone you trust and start asking around about reputable ministries where you could go and begin to start the journey of unpacking it.
The Glass House is a production of Lifeway. It's produced and edited by Angie Elkins, sound engineering by Dale Sandberg, original music by Robert Elkins, photography by Rebecca McVeigh, and artwork by Heather Berzinski. We are your hosts, Ben and Lindley Mandrell. Thanks for listening.